of good knowledge about that out there now. But this project also comes out of our own personal experience. And so for me, I think it was this experience from about 2018 onwards of realizing that people's needs had changed, that the kind of experiences people were describing personally were much more acute. There was much more distress or higher levels of anxiety and higher levels of hopelessness, despair amongst some people. And realizing that that was something which we needed to address. And for Rebecca, who's not able to be with us tonight, who is one of the other key workers on this project, it was her work, a long-term work in the community around climate issues. She's been active in community projects for, I don't know, 15, 20 years now. So it's partly that work, partly her work with Carbon Conversations in the past. She was one of our very early facilitators for that project, but also her experience of running climate cafes and that small group model of creating a space where people could come and speak about whatever it was they wanted to speak about. And so that for Rebecca, that was key. And Daniela, you speak for yourself about what it was for you.
Yeah, I think for me, again, it was around 2018, like experience a great reawakening of my concerns about climate and then starting a journey of exploring what is available there as a person, as an activist, but also as a psychologist. Was there any way that we could use my skills and my knowledge, and getting in touch, discovering the CPA and attending our local workshops, Ro, that I think they were mostly based on the old Carbon Conversation workshops, the workshop on communication and talking to family, and the Marshall Guns workshop. So yes, I started to work with Ro and some other colleagues from the Cambridge Climate Therapists, a volunteer group, thinking about how we could support people going through the climate crisis. And I think in this interaction, I talked to Ro a lot about narrative therapy, collective narrative, and about the Tree of Life method that I had used clinic before and used with children. So we thought about that would be a powerful tool to add to the set that we're going to talk more later. But I think that was for me the motivations to get involved in this project.
Right. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the approach to this, because it's a rather mixed type of group work that that this project is based on. And so the groups run for 20 hours, which could be 10 evening meetings. It could be a day followed by 7 evening meetings. It could be 3 whole days. It could be some other combination that somebody chooses to come up with. But basically, within these groups, there are 3 things which we are trying to bring together. One is to provide a group experience with all the power that a group experience can have of bringing people together, creating that web of connection, which leads to experiences of feeling supported and feeling that there is space for you, feeling that you're valued, and that there can be something healing about that. So these are not therapy groups, but they do have some aspect of things which you find in a therapy group, that attention to process and that attention to people's personal needs and experiences. So that's one aspect of the group. Another aspect which we've drawn on very much is that of experiential learning, which some of you may be familiar with, which is the idea that we learn best through experience and through being able to reflect on that experience and generalize from it and apply that learning. So where there is learning going on in these groups, it's very personal, and it's based around that idea that it's out of the experience that learning comes. But the third aspect of these groups is that we want people to be able to act in the world. We want them to be able to engage with the complexity of the systems that we're all part of. And so these 3 things intertwine in the group experience that we're trying to create. And one of the people I often go back to when I'm thinking about this is Dorothy Stock-Whitaker and her book, Using Groups to Help People. Some of you, I'm sure, will have come across her in your trainings, but she was somebody who initiated this kind of work where you bring people together around a common problem, a shared problem. For her, it was often people who maybe they shared the fact that they'd got a child with a disability, or that they'd got a young person who was in trouble, or something like that. But here, the quintessential shared problem of our times is climate and all of the issues around that. So we're bringing people together with the hope that we can use the group to help people into feeling better about what they're doing, about the experiences that they're having, about their contribution to the movement. And we often, as we're talking about this, we use the overarching metaphor for the whole of the climate movement as an ecosystem, and the need to create that ecosystem as a rich and flourishing place in which all kinds of people can find their right home, so that it's not a monoculture of one particular kind of people, and it's not a monoculture of one particular kind of action either. And so a lot of influences have gone into our thinking around this, and we'll talk a little bit about those. So the rapidly developing field of climate psychology has obviously been central. We're all members of the Climate Psychology Alliance, and the support of the CPA, who are sponsoring this project, has been absolutely invaluable. But within that, our approach is basically, it's a psychosocial approach. We're interested in that complex interrelationship between social forces and personal experience, how those interlink and create these often quite difficult experiences. And so we look through that lens at climate distress. We don't talk about climate anxiety particularly because it's rather a pathologizing concept. We look at frameworks of grief for understanding the feelings that people have, and the idea of the climate journey that people often go through as they wake up and realize what's going on and struggle to become involved. And within the groups, as we've conceived them and run them in the pilot, there are three modules, we call them. And the first one we call just coming together. And I'm going to get Daniela to talk a little bit more about what's included in that module, which makes up the first three meetings of these groups, which in the most recent pilot, which we've been running, Rebecca has done that as a one-day workshop, and that worked extremely well. In the first pilot, we took that across 3 meetings. People may decide to use the materials differently from that. But Daniela, do you want to tell us just a little bit about that first module?
Yes. So at the first module, well, one overall way of thinking this ecosystem model that Ro talked about. So we are going to start kind of taking care of the individual. So people arrive. So I think the first part of the first session, or the first part of the whole day workshop, would be thinking about where people are in terms of climate distress and normalizing that response to the real experience that everybody's living. And from that, creating that safe space, go into a journey of looking back of what are the things that inspired you in your life to give you strength, what are your values, what are your hopes and dreams for the future. And for that, we use the tree of life. That is a collective narrative approach. They use the metaphor of a tree to help people talk about the preferred stories and kind of open up from the problem saturated story of talking about how everything is difficult from the climate. So the hope there is for people to kind of distance themselves a little bit from the crisis and think more in them and in their history of what are the things that make them strong. So they come out of that connecting their tree with the other trees, so creating a forest. So again, it's the group coming together from the individual distress to the individual resources to then the group resources to then be able to face what, following the metaphor, is the storms. So the storm of what the climate crisis is. And we find that that is a very good point then for the group itself, start thinking about then talking to others outside, which comes into the second module that goes into communication. Is that right, Ro?
Yeah, that's that's right. So this first part, obviously, you're dealing with all of the issues about a group that's coming together for the first time. We spend a lot of time at the beginning of that meeting, with those meetings, with people just simply introducing themselves, and we suggest various techniques for doing that and so on. But in the second module, which you don't have to do in this order, incidentally. You can do module 3 before module 2 if you want to. We'll be interested if people experiment. But the second module is about communication. And there are two big chunks in this. One is about, we draw on psychotherapeutic ideas of content and process, the idea that the content of a conversation is just like the icing on the top of the cake, or it's a bit of the iceberg that you see sticking up. And everything else is underneath. And so we introduce people to some of these basic therapeutic ideas, which we have a sort of, rather more ordinary language for talking about, as you do in psychotherapy. And we work with the stories that people bring of how things have gone wrong, mainly in talking with family and friends, where it's often a very, very charged point for a lot of people, finding a lot of difficulty getting into conflicts there. So we try to unpack those, we try to give people some skills and techniques for dealing with that better. And using some little bits of role play around people's experiences to try to see how you might make a conversation go differently. So this is very much focused on your communication with those who are close to you, which is, I think, is a great source of distress for some people. And we found that this has been a very effective workshop when we've done it in the past. And the second bit of that, Daniela, do you want to talk about the way we use Marshall Gantz's work? Some of you, I'm sure, have heard of Marshall Gantz.
Yeah, so again, it's the work on the individual narratives to kind of develop like a way to talk, bringing the personal story to talk to others that, has been shown to be very helpful and powerful. And we have, during our pilots, kind of explained this model to seasoned activists from XR and people that have been, talking to others all the time, and they still find it quite helpful to kind of relate to this framework to talk and build their story in a way that can reach other people and equalize the distress. So it's very good. And both of those workshops, they were part of the original Carbon Conversations, weren't they, Ro? But it feels like
talking with family and friends was the Marshall Gantz. Wasn't, but it's one that I did a lot in the past. But basically, what Gantz's idea is that we live through stories. We tell our best communication is when we tell stories, and so his idea is you tell your story of, it's called it self, us, and now. The story of self is the story of how you came to this point, this crisis point of your own. The story of us is about the groups you're speaking to, because it's always important to speak directly to some particular people, not the whole world. Activists often say, I want to talk to everybody. And the answer is no, talk to these people, whoever they are, whether they are, their grandparents, their trade union activists, their other parents, or whatever it is. Speak to those people, find what you have in common with them, speak to that. And the idea of the story of now, which has in it an ask. What is it you're asking people to do at that moment? And this becomes a very powerful repertoire of anecdotes, stories, images, metaphors, which you can draw on when in a conversation you have a moment to speak to somebody else, when they're actually prepared to listen to you. So that's another strand that we bring in this work on communication. And both of these aspects of the work that we're doing, people find very empowering, because it gives people a sense that they can find a way around things which have tripped them up and been difficult in the past. And we also add into that some of the work from climate outreach. Again, probably a lot of you in the UK have come across, who do a lot of work based in social psychology about messaging and audiences, and what plays well, what plays badly with different audiences. So this chunk coming after the bit where we've been talking a bit about the feelings very directly and ways of working together to create some collective strength, we then try to offer these rather more empowering tools of how you can work when you're actually out there. So that's the second module. Daniela, you wanted me to talk about the next bit, didn't you?
Okay, I feel if Rebecca was here, she would be talking about
this. If Rebecca was here, Rebecca would be doing this bit. But yes. I'm Rebecca's stand-in. So this is about systems. We move on to look at the acting very directly at the acting in the world, and we do this through the lens of thinking about the systems that we are part of, and the complexity of those systems, and how we live in them and how we act in them. And so we introduce a number of different things in this context. We look here at specifically at carbon literacy and carbon reduction. This is the point at which we also return to the work of the old carbon conversations model. And we do some work on carbon literacy and carbon reduction, because wherever you are actually acting, it's important to know what the problem is and where you're going to make a big difference, where you're going to make a small difference, whether you're trying to reduce carbon in your own life, or whether you're trying to persuade your kids' school not to put the children on a plane for the skiing trip to France, whatever it is. You need to understand that, you know, a good idea of it. So we do some work around that. But we also do work where we get people to actually look at themselves in their overall context, and we get them to map their connections to other organizations, to other people. And this is where it's very useful to have a very good idea of all of the different organizations around you in your community that are taking some kind of action on climate change, because we're also trying to help people find the right place for themselves. People often come to us and they say, well, I don't think I could glue myself to anything, so I don't think I know what to do, or something like that. Or they've got some other thing which they just sort of feel trapped.
It's the part of finding the sustainable activism, isn't it? That's so based on the idea that taking action helps, but it's about helping the groups and individuals within the group to find what will work for them and what's sustainable for them.
Yeah. And also, as part of that, we do an activity which is drawn from reflective practice, and this is using a Tavistock model, which Rebecca has introduced us to, of reflective practice. It's very powerful when we've done it with activists, about actually using the group to reflect on something which is an issue for them. So there are a lot of different things which come together, make up part of this module. The idea of it really is to help people to locate themselves in a community of other people who are taking action, because it's an old cliche that action's the antidote to despair, but it has to come through going through some sort of process and finding a place that works for you. So that's basically the third module. And at some point in all of this process, we also pair people up to meet outside the group, because one of the things which we realized was that, and normally in a lot of groups, the group runs, the group ends, that's the end. And that this didn't really feel appropriate to something which is part of a big ecosystem. So although the group itself is time limited, we wanted to encourage people to make connections outside it and to offer their connections to others in the group. So we put people into these buddy pairs, and one of the things which they can do is to work through looking at the carbon reduction material, which we provide in a little pamphlet called Living Lightly. Now this is for those of you who know Carbon Conversations, this is a very chopped down version of the old In Time for Tomorrow book. It's 20,000 words. It's a lot shorter, and it's got sort of lots of references and guidance if people want to do that. But the pairs are also about allowing people to use the group to build relationships beyond it. So that's mostly, I think, of what we were going to say about it. So that's how it relates to the old Carbon Conversations. It was sort of born on the back of it, but it goes a lot further and it takes in the issues which we have felt are very critical for people we've been working with over the last few years. The other question I did want to touch on was the audience and facilitation. And so the people who've come to the pilot groups that we've run have been drawn from our own immediate circles, really. And so they've tended to be educated, tended to be involved in action, not very diverse groups of people. And so what we're hoping is that as this project develops, other people will get drawn in, and in the process of doing so, the materials will change and be changed by the groups that other people facilitate with. So one of the things which we're very clear about is that we want these materials to be used flexibly. We want them to be developed. So the last question people have been asking us is also, who can facilitate these groups? Do you need some special training? And here, I think if you look at facilitation and the kind of trainings that are available in facilitation, you will find that there's everything from, you know, a one-day course on how to run your workplace meetings a bit better, to the 3-year training of the Institute of Group Analysis. So what are we to say? I think our answer is that you may be coming from all kinds of different backgrounds to facilitate this. You may be a therapist, you may be a coach, you may have a background in experiential learning and education, you may just be somebody who's spent your life living and working in groups, who's read a load of books and is just good at it. So what we want people to do is to look at the materials, to think about it and say to themselves, do I think I could facilitate this? Yeah. And if you think yes, then we say, ask, what we would like you to do is to give it a go. Because we don't want to provide special training for this. We are hoping that people who've got a good experience of facilitation will come and do it. We do suggest very strongly that people co-facilitate. This is not a group that is easy to run on your own, because you are having to do a number of different things. You're having to pay attention to the group process, but you're also having to introduce these practical things that people are going to do, which create the experiences out of which the learning comes. So it really does take 2 people to co-facilitate. So the CPA is going to be running some introductory days for people who would like to get a little bit of more of a taster of things. But if you're wanting to, think you'd like to just do it, then that's fine. The materials are in draft form at the moment. They will be, we hope, going up onto the new Living with the Climate Crisis website in January. But if you, from what you've heard or what you know already, think, I'd really like to, you know, get a group going for the new year, then contact us, because we will then let you have some of the draft materials to use so that you can get started. But everything, we hope, will be there in January.
So the idea now is to hear a little bit of the questions you have. As we are maybe expecting some overlap, we thought about if people would like to briefly type their questions in the chat, and then we're going to start answering them. We still have 45 minutes, so it's plenty of time to answer questions or talk further about one aspect of what we said or the other. So please let us know. If somebody has difficulties in typing, is maybe join us from a means that doesn't have a keyboard, if just maybe put your hand up and we kind of open the floor for you to talk as well. We don't want to exclude you. So we have a few things here.
Yeah, we have. Yeah, interesting questions coming in there.
Okay.
So should we just start from the top? So.
Oh wow.
How do we contact you? So Daniela, you were going to put
Yeah.
that into the chat. So do we find that people are able to access and sustain attendance over 20 hours? Well, in the pilot groups, the answer to that's been yes. We had the usual experiences of people being unwell and not being able to come to a meeting. but yes, I think once the group really forms and you get a commitment to the group, yeah, I think it can sometimes be difficult to at the recruitment stage, I would say, in answer to that one. And we've got fees. That's something we didn't talk about. So our hope is that people will offer these groups so that they are free at the point of use, so that anybody can access them, anybody can come. And we've done that because we've created this as our kind of contribution to the movement, and we're hoping that other people will be able to offer groups in the same spirit. But we do realise that for some people it's not possible to do something which you're not paid for, or which you're and that there are other expenses that come along with running a meeting if you have to hire a place. So I think that this is going to be a question of individual judgment, that you may want to fundraise in order that somebody can be paid to facilitate a group. If you're part of an organisation, that may be possible. You may need to charge some minimal amount for people to share the cost of a room that you're having to hire, for example. But in general, we wanted these groups to be offered with that sense of being part of the movement, not something that you had to pay for to come to. So that's our. Was there something else in there, wasn't there? How many?
I wonder if also about the fees is the idea that maybe people can, find funding from organizations to deliver the group, isn't it? So
Yeah.
the facilitators might receive some return for their time and effort, because it is a time-consuming group to run, isn't it? It's 20 hours of group, but I think for facilitators means preparation, brief, debrief, supervision, etc. It's quite a full-on group to manage. So yeah, hopefully people can find funding to run the group, but we hope that it is free at the point of access for the participants. There is a hand up from Cindy, but Cindy, is this related to what we're talking now? It is, okay. Because I think we might have some more questions about fee and payment, don't we? If you can, is it brief, Cindy? Could you just say it now?
All I was going to say was my experience of whether to charge a fee or whether to not charge a fee. I've had very good experience of asking people on a pay what they can afford basis, just pay on a donation basis. And you tend to find that, yeah.
That is a good way. Thanks. Okay, so shall we maybe leave the questions for fees for now and move on to other aspects?
So the question of the number of participants. So we've run the groups with 8 people. So it's a small group. I think if you start with 8, you can be pretty sure that you're not going to drop below 6. If you start with more, it's hard. We found it hard to give enough time to everybody. So our advice would be go for 8, but experiment.
Yeah. Okay, there's an interesting question about marketing this group. If the climate crisis is top of mind, and how to reach a diverse group of people. That's a very good question. We do hope that people will think about their local needs. I think the whole idea of these groups is to try to be as local as possible, I think, so people can adapt the material and adapt the facilitation and the number of sessions to what are the needs of the people that they are trying to support.
I think this is a question that quite often comes up. People often feel that, well, we're not reaching the right people. There are always people who just don't get it. And I think that someone who's going to come to one of these groups is somebody who does get it. You're not going to get people coming who don't get it yet. It's not, there's other work that you have to do first to draw in the people who don't get it. So although you might find that you're in a situation where you could use one of the activities from these groups with people who perhaps didn't get it in quite the same way, but I think that big question of how you engage the unengaged is one that is certainly beyond the scope of these groups. But I think these groups are something which can be part of a much bigger project. You know, if you've got a big project in your community which is engaging people in all sorts of other ways, then this group could be part of what you offered.
Yeah, there is a question that connects to this one, that is how do participants find out about it. So I think it's from the people who decide to run the group to think about how they're going to recruit and what are they running their group for. It's not something that we are going to be organizing or setting up. I think the idea is to make this material available for people to run with it according to their local needs.
I think this is always, you know, quite a difficult question. People are often hoping that there is some magic tool that when you offer it, people are going to come flooding in. And I know all my years of experience in working in this field, it doesn't happen. It's often very long, slow work of making connections, building connections with people in other organisations, talking with people who may be a bit interested. And so one of the activities which we do in that third module is creating maps of our connections. Where are we connected to other people? Where can we talk about this? Where can we begin to offer this? So,
yeah. There's a few interesting questions there, practical questions, but there is one that's a bit more theoretical approach, like somebody is asking, I told Ro that we would have this question, how does this compare with the work that reconnects groups? So do you feel like answering that one now, Ro?
Yeah. One of the things that you say in the Facilitator's Guide is that we see these groups as part of the ecosystem. And I think when you're recruiting, one of the important things which we suggest you do is that you have a one-to-one conversation with each person who you think might join your group. And one of the reasons for this is to decide whether this is the right group for them. Because for some people, this may be the right group. For another person doing a work that reconnects group, may be a better option. They might be somebody who actually needs more intensive support for themselves individually than this group can offer. And so I think what we're beginning to see, certainly in the UK, is a growing diversity of psychologically based offers beginning to come through. So there are climate cafes of the work that reconnects. There's people are running climate circles. Daniela's about to run a walk and talk group. We run a listening bench in Cambridge. Various different things which people are offering. And I think the thing is that some things are going to work for some people and others for others. And so I wouldn't like to kind of, I want to say this isn't a competition, it's an ecosystem.
Yeah, it's not comparison. We have had in our pilot the experience of people who have attended work the Reconnect groups, and they found this group very different, but also useful. I think it's to bear in mind, if you follow this group as that would be published, like all the modules, session 1, session 2, session 3, these are your options of activities, that's what you should be looking for and all of that. It's a very structured group, so it's not as democratic. And I think some people might find that style not suitable. But again, we are hoping that people will adapt and change as needed. More questions?
We've got two. There was one which came up, which we missed a bit higher up, which was about online groups, which I think we need to come back to. But there are two here about diversity and intersectionality. And I think this is a really, really important issue. But I think this is an issue which is an issue for, this is an issue for the climate movement as a whole. Is how do we do this? And I think the answer is that we have to, you know, it's a real mixture of interrogating ourselves, thinking about what we're doing, but also working out, you know, what we do beyond that in our particular local community. So one of the things that, you know, very many years ago now, which I did, we ran a here in Cambridge, we ran a project called the Akashi Project, which came about through making connections with some people in the Gujarati community here in Cambridge, and setting up a diversity project, which culminated in a big festival and brought a lot of people together who would not have come to something about climate previously. But my experience of that was that it was something that took an awful lot of work, and it took a paid worker to do it in this community project that I was running at the time. And so I think these are really serious questions to which there is no easy answer. If, like me, you're sitting in a place of white privilege, taking those steps, which involve listening first, before you really do anything else, you've got to get out there and you've got to listen and find out about the people who you may think you're doing outreach to, but they are sitting in the center of their world, you know, just like you're sitting in the center of yours. They're not necessarily, they don't see themselves necessarily as being on your periphery, waiting for you to outreach them. They're in their own lives. So I think for me, I'm just aware that this is a big, tricky question that probably most of us in the climate movement need to do some more big thinking about. So I don't know whether that's a helpful answer or not. Do you want to say anything more about that, Daniela?
No, I agree with you. I think I draw into community psychology models to think about that, and also being very aware of this idea of outreach, that the people that we feel sometimes we are trying to include maybe don't find that that's how they want to be included. So this is not necessarily a group that has to be imposed to people, but hopefully people invite to participate or facilitate it themselves. We hope that that will be spread, and as it gets translated to other languages as well, become more accessible.
And will change.
Yeah, it will change.
And will change as people do.
We are hoping that will change. Yeah.
Change. People will take the ideas and use them in different ways.
Yeah.
Here's the in-person or Zoom question again. Indoors or outside? What about running this in schools? Well, hey, right.
It's not a group that we developed for children. It's young people may be able to do this. Will again be adaptation. Involves quite a lot of reading and some writing, but I don't know. I think if the school is interested or the group of people interested, that could be done. I don't see why not. What do you think, Ro?
I think there are aspects of it that
Yeah.
we could do with, and it depends again on the age
The
of the
age.
children, but the Tree of Life can be done with children.
Yeah, I have done the Tree of Life in primary schools as a drop-in session with children and parents and teachers. But we have an attempt to do the whole group.
No.
But it could be something, I think elements of this group could be done as, I don't know, there was a science fair in a school and a group of parents wanted to do something about climate. So some people kind of draw some of the ideas of the carbon footprint from the old Carbon Conversations project. And I came in with Tree of Life and a group of us with different activities that more or less, you know, could be combined into this group session could be done. So again, there's scope for a lot of use here. The Tree of Life was originally developed by Nazelo Nube Milo and David Deborah to be used with children. And yeah, in a way that made them feel stronger about talking about their lives. There's a lot more information about this in the material.
And in this question of in-person or Zoom, we conceived of this as an in-person group run in a specific local community, because what we were interested in was helping people to act within the community that they're part of, to build collective strength locally. However, we ended up running our first pilot on Zoom because of the pandemic, and because we were split. Half of us were in one city and half of us in another one. So we have included in the facilitators guide some notes on what to do if you find you want to run this on Zoom. And I think the circumstances in which you might need to do that, we recognise there are people in scattered rural communities who can't get together. There are parents who can't get out in the evenings, things like that. So you might want to do some hybrid of physical meetings and some bits happening on Zoom. So again, what we would say would be to look at what we say, have a think about it, see what works for you.
It was possible, wasn't it?
It was possible.
It was possible, but it's much harder work for the facilitators to.
It's much harder
to support the group remotely.
Yeah. Yeah. And so this question of group numbers, I think we said we thought 8 was our ideal starting point, but yeah, 6 to 10. Now this next one, do include aspects of emotion modulation, stress management, self-care. So you could, I think, you could include some of these things. I mean, there are 1 or 2 moments where we do, in some of the kind of checking in and checking out, we suggest there are some visualizations, there are some gentle kind of relaxation things which you might do at those points. It's not that this doesn't fit with the model, it's more that we couldn't put everything in, and so we talk a lot about self-care, and in the first module we ask people to contribute their ideas of all the things which they've found that help them, and then we feed back into that conversation our own views and ideas about that. So again, I think this is one of these points where if that's something which is one of your strengths and you wanted to include that as a bigger part of it, again, you could look at that and see whether that was something that might be particularly important for your group and the way that they were. So
there's some questions about I think we skipped about the carbon conversations comparisons and the idea of focusing on reducing carbon footprints individually.
Right.
Yeah. Yes, and then there's the answer with it. Living with the climate crisis seems to be helpful for people who want to sustain a level of activism. But I think you could talk more a little bit about it, Ro, like of your experience of running Carbon Conversation before. Was there something in particular that was missing that you think this group adds to it?
Well, I think it's about being in a very, very different time from when we created Carbon Conversations here in the UK. This is like back in 2006, 7, 8. The government was acting on climate change, and this was a period when the UK government was passing its Climate Change Act. And so although most of us in the climate movement thought what the government was doing was completely inadequate, there was action. And so to focus on the helping people to see the scale of changes that was needed and the scale of changes that they could make to their personal life in that context where systemic change was being promised seemed very appropriate. And since then in the UK, since 2010, we have seen the UK government go backwards on all of its climate commitments and all of its actions on the environment. And we have seen internationally, we have seen completely inadequate responses to the crisis. And so people find themselves in a very different situation from then. That was a much more hopeful time, where it seemed legitimate to be approaching everything through the lens of what was this going to mean for me and my family, and how was I going to have to live, and what could I do within this system in which things might be changing. That feels so different now, that we've shifted our focus really to how we live in this precarious situation, how we intervene in the systems that we're part of, how we find the right place for ourselves, how we manage to find meaning in life in a situation that's so difficult. And carbon reduction is still important. It's every bit of carbon that doesn't go up there into the sky matters. So it does still matter, but I think it needs to take a slightly different place from the place that it had before. And I think the other difference is that the old Carbon Conversations project was, somebody once referred to it as bomb-proof. We provided so much instruction that really you could give it a go and facilitate it if you with very little training. You could come at it and you could have a go of meeting with your friends and working through the stuff. And you know, some outcomes were good and some weren't. But these groups do mean that you need to have some experience of facilitation. You need to be confident in your skills as a facilitator to be able to deliver it well. So I think, do you want to say anything about what you think the facilitator skills needed are, Daniela?
I think the key thing about is be aware of the group and the need to create the safe space for people to be able to explore and share. And when we talk about climate stress and climate crisis and carbon reduction, those are very difficult realities that people have to face. So it's important to have that skill of trying to understand that process and to be there to allow that to happen and be able to contain the group and move forward. Yeah. So listening skills but just being with people and be aware of, I think, some of these aspects of some dynamics and unconscious process that go through it. And there are lots of informations within the guides to try to skill people to do those things. I was going to say about carbon reduction, and I think doing the pilots, what struck me was two things. One is that there are some people that over-focus on their carbon reduction, and actually it's important that to be able to allow the person to kind of think about other things, what else, and not focus so much on their carbon reduction. But it's also, I think, it's important for the facilitators and for the people thinking about, using their psychological skills to think about how much of their lives is aligned with the cause they're preaching and being together. I think it's one of those groups that's very unique, that the facilitators are also experiencing climate stress and climate crisis. And I think that is really, really kind of nice, different group to be, rather than being in a position of power and expertise and normalized experience. It's not a group that has answers. There's some suggestions and some ideas. And in all the groups at the moment that we run for people who, experience getting in touch and letting the climate crisis get into their lives, it's like people do come desperately looking for answers. And this is a group that has some ideas, but not all the answers, but it's about facilitator space for people to start looking for their answers or start to realize that maybe that might not be a very clear answer for things. Is that helpful? I got in lots of things in that.
Okay.
Those things are important to be said, I think.
Okay.
How are we doing with, there's some specific questions about which module is harder to do it online, or if modules can be used separate. I think the answer, yes, people can use as much or as little from the material as they want, whatever suits. And I don't do you remember any particular module should be harder to do online?
I think the first module, because
people don't know each other.
people don't know each other. You're actually trying to form a group. You're trying to do these two things at once. You've got to try to form the group and get those group interactions going. And so, yeah. So someone's asking, God, there's lots of different questions here. Some of them overlap and some of them don't. So let's take an easy one. Will you be running the whole day intro sessions again? Yes, we will. But just give us a moment and we will organize another one of those. Could the program be a bridging or a follow-on from the climate cafes? Yes, I think it definitely could. Yeah. I think that
as well as other groups, isn't it? And other possible support.
And then there's a question about something about offering a group within a shared organisation with colleagues in activism. Yeah. Yes, you could. Absolutely. The people who we, in our initial groups, a lot of them came through, quite a few of them had come through local XR group. Were active in XR, but not everybody.
No.
We've got these. So and there was this one about delivering the whole program, or can a module be done without the others? We've designed this as a program, but we hope that people will have a look at it and think, well, I don't think I could do that, but I could do this. And you might decide that you wanted to use the tree of life aspect of it with a group that you're working with, and that was useful to you. Or you might decide that you wanted to introduce some reflective practice sessions in your group of activists and just take that and do it. Or you might decide that you wanted to use the activity which is about mapping the community that you're part of and just do that with a group that you're part of. You might decide that you wanted to use all the materials that we've provided on carbon reduction to work with your parent-teacher association about the carbon footprint of the school. So
yeah,
I think we're hoping that people will look at this stuff and go, I'd love to run a whole group, but I don't think I can. And take something which they can use.
Or take a part of it and add to some group activity they already run.
Yeah. And the workshops which are the communications bits are workshops which we've run as separate workshops amongst people within the climate movement over quite a long period of time now. And I've run them with school with sixth formers as well, who loved the Marshall Gantz workshop and were absolutely amazing and hilarious when they did it. So you can do things from it as one-offs as well. We're hoping that it will be a resource. This is a resource. So, I mean, we loved running the group. And it was an amazing experience running the pilot. And Rebecca's in the middle of a second pilot group at the moment, which is going very well. So we hope some people will run the whole thing.
There's a question here about the outcomes of the pilots, like bigger than expected results, takeaways from participants, maybe people feeling empowered, making choices. That's a very good question. I think there was definitely feedback, and their evaluation was that everybody found the group helpful, interesting, apart from the people that drop out. One person dropped out, but it was for health reasons. But
I think the takeaways were mostly about the power of the group experience, and that was very interesting to me, because it was the power of the group experience across time, and the development of that group experience and that development of connection between people, the sense that you weren't alone, that you could say things in this group that you couldn't say elsewhere. And I think that was one of the most one of the most powerful things for people about it. So I think I'm hoping that we've covered everything there. And
Yeah.
Daniela, I'm wondering whether we should just actually open the floor now to anybody who wants to talk. So what I suggest is that you just unmute yourself and pitch in, and we'll see if we can make that work. Someone's just asked, was our pilot on? Our first pilot was online. The second pilot is face to face. So if anybody wants to pitch in with comments or further questions,
We have like 12 minutes left, so
yeah. So just pitch in.
There's a hand up, Jackie. Mackenzie,
Yes,
would you like to?
Yeah, I'm mostly concerned about talking to young people, especially parents. I just feel I'm fortunate to live this long, but I just don't know what to say to people, younger people. I keep reading that in the US, the suicide rate has gone through the roof in young people, and much of it is climate change. So I'm just wondering what if any of your modules address them.
The modules talk a lot about climate distress in the facilitator's guide. I think that for young people experiencing some of these acute forms of climate distress, sometimes a group, or maybe a more open-ended group, might be a better answer. Sometimes some individual work may be more appropriate. Don't know whether anybody else here tonight has anything they wanted to respond to Jackie's question. Yeah. Okay.
I was just thinking, like, that would be if you, for example, Jackie was a participant of this group, we would hope that you would feel safe to share your concerns about talking to young people with the other members, and then get from the other people's help to think about those issues. So towards the end of the group, people do narrow down like what areas that they would like to address, or they're thinking about they could invest further their actions in that direction. And if that's one of the things, the group would then possibly come together to try to help you with that. But as Rose said, I think the CPA does quite a lot of work with young people and teenagers, and that there's a lot of maybe some information there about the issues and how to talk. I would recommend have a look at the website for more information, I think. Tom has his hand up.
Yes, I have. In my last group, I had a lot of people. We were 7, and there were 6 of them who raised questions about the war in Ukraine and the exponential experience of unsafety in this world. Also, the big ecological decline and the polarization of politics. And it is hard not to broaden the scope of the workshops. So, do you have an opinion on this?
I think what we felt in creating these materials is that it is a response to the precarity that people are experiencing, which I think is what you're identifying there. And of course, this goes beyond climate, and it's experienced differently in different countries at the moment. And so I think this sense that we're dealing with multiple crises at the same time is certainly something to keep in mind if you start to run one of these groups, that people's needs to find space where they can speak things which have felt unspeakable to others is very strong, I think, at the moment.
Yeah.
And there is a question, I think, in a group which is walking this line that we're trying to walk between offering these experiential learning experiences which have value and offering a group in which you can say whatever you want about whatever you want, can be difficult. And you might find that you've just ditched half of the module because what your group needs is just to talk about something else, and you need to facilitate that. So one of the things which we've done here in Cambridge is two members, Anne, who's on the call here, and another colleague, Jackie, run a group, which is a 9-session open group, sort of, not open group, it's a fixed term group, fixed session group called What Now, What Next? And this was just a space for people to come together and talk about whatever they wanted to, which encompassed much more, perhaps, of what you're talking about. I don't know if Anne wants to.
You would then initiate another group.
Well, this was a different group. Anne is on the call and she can tell you about the What Now, What Next group if you would like to hear about that, because it's a different model to living with the climate crisis. It is equally valuable, and for some people may be more the right thing to do. Do you want to just say a quick word about it, Anne?
Yes, I can. This was very different to what Rose talking about, in the sense that it was an unstructured group. We simply felt that we wanted to find out if people would respond to be given a chance to do, I think, what Rose was just talking about. You know, there's a hell of a lot of things going on. There's definitely, and we're focused, you know, essentially on climate change, but, you know, there are many other things. And we actually we did some leafleting. It was quite informal, and got together a group of 8 people from across, well, mainly Cambridge, but across the county, some of whom are activists, some of whom weren't. One was an academic researcher. They aged from 22 to 75, which was a tremendously interesting group of people with very, very different things to bring to it. And they did talk about whatever they wanted to. And for some, it was their dread, their guilt about not doing enough. For others, it was about their optimism because they couldn't face not being able to do enough. We had lots of things going on, but what came out most was this immense relief just to be able to talk about this. To talk about things, and, you know, completely confidentially, where they didn't have to go and talk to their families about it if that was not possible at that time. And also what came out of that was one person in particular, we felt could really use individual therapy with a psychotherapist who was climate aware, shall we say, because they'd actually had quite a difficult experience with a therapist who hadn't been. This was around an issue of whether or not to have children, which was a massive issue. So we were running this knowing that there would be other groups run in the Cambridge Climate Therapists, and we're looking a bit, I suppose it's a small ecosystem, isn't it? Some people might go to Ruth, to Ro and Daniela's group, that kind of group, and from that want to take the issues that it's maybe not particularly addressed but has brought up for them to a kind of open, unstructured group. And Jackie is a group analyst. I'm not, but I've run quite a lot of groups in other contexts. And so there was a real holding, and the moments of real connection between people were very, I'm not going to say transformative, that would be too strong a word, but very reassuring and comforting, and just the sheer humanity of that was fantastic. The power of connection, I think that's been a word that's been used tonight. But it's very different, and it's not for everybody. And actually, we're going to be running another one, and we're struggling to know that issue of who to address it to, I think, is really quite important. And we just thought, let's put it out there and see what happens. We leafleted, we went round places, we stuck notices, and we called it What Now, What Next? And we said, nobody knows what's happening and where things are going. It's good to talk. And that was really it.
Thank you. Thank you
Sorry,
very
that
much.
was
Thank
meant
you,
to be
Anne.
longer,
Yeah, you weren't prepared, but that was brilliant.
Yeah, we've got 3 minutes. I
Yeah.
think we've got time for one last person to say something before we close the call. Is there anybody who?
Margaret has her hand up.
Yes, you have. I did put a question in the chat. Why are you focusing exclusively on the climate crisis and not the ecological crisis? Because we know that that is just as serious and comes from the same roots. And many people have shown that it's essential to address the two issues together.
Okay, so I think in a lot of the work I've done, I have emphasized climate, but I think you're right that we face biodiversity crisis as well, and they are so interlinked that I think it's very difficult to talk about one without talking about the other. You know, the moment you start to talk about the need to, you know, reduce animal farming, you're talking about the biodiversity crisis and so on. So I think my emphasis has been on climate, but it's not because I don't think the other things are important. So thank you for raising that. I'm sorry we missed it in the chat.
Can I just recommend looking at the Navdanya International newsletter?
Put it in the chat, and then everybody will be able to.
Yes.
Then everyone will be able to see
Yeah.
it. Okay.
Thank you,
Right.
Margaret.
Thank you very much, Margaret. Daniela, I think
we're
we
coming
should-
to an end now. So
Yeah.
thank you very much for everybody for your patience. We hope this was helpful tonight. And you have Rose's email, but also you can equally email the CPA. And I'm sure that it will be informed when the material goes online.
Yeah. And if anybody is thinking, well, I actually really want to run a group and start it in January, let us know. We'll send you some stuff. So, and I think that people have raised a huge number of the issues that we have struggled with as we have created it. This question, what's the balance between this and that? How do we try to reach people who are not actually interested? Who should we be aiming this stuff at? It's very encouraging in a way to see that you share our difficulties and our preoccupations. And so I'd just like to say thank you for coming tonight and sharing your thoughts with us. It's really helpful to hear all of that.
Yeah. All right.
So
I am just going to end the session then. Thank you everybody for your thank you. And yeah, might see some of you next Saturday.
okay.